Going to pass from someone well known to you, Nachmanides, to an individual I can't imagine anyone in this audience has heard about. It's the first time his name, I think, is being mentioned in any kind of Congress in Israel, let alone in America. Be that as it may, the real-time eschatology of Kristallnacht of Menahem Risikoff. Orthodox Jewish theological responses to the Kristallnacht in America echoed those in Palestine and Eastern Europe. In Derushim, Chochma V'Da'at, Mordechai Tzvi Schwartz of Cleveland focused on the impossibility of natural explanation for Kristallnacht and on assimilation and teshuvah. Tobias Geffen in Atlanta, in Nachalat Yosef, spoke about the inevitability of Hitler's and Nazism's collapse. And Chicago editor of Hapardes focused on Hitler's intention to erase God. And there were communal prayers and fast days sponsored by the Union of Orthodox Rabbis, Sheret Israel Sephardic Synagogue, Yeshiva University, and a variety of sites in Boston and Chicago. In Brooklyn, New York, Menahem Risikoff called for an assembly of Kohanim to perform teshuvah in such a way as to invoke redemption. Risikoff, 1868 through 1960, a product of Slonim and Volozhin yeshivas, served as rabbi in Kazan, Tartarstan until 1905, when riots broke out and he immigrated to America. He authored over 20 works of responsa, halachic, novellae, derush, and terush. He cited several of his unpublished manuscripts in his 1948 Likutei Dinim, Torat HaKohanim, which, by lucky happenstance and the goodwill of his grandson, Navy Chaplain Captain Arnold Resnikoff, I was able to shepherd these manuscripts into the Library of Congress Hebraica section in Washington. Risikoff's messianic expectations culminated in an apocalyptic drama in response to Kristallnacht. They unfolded in terms of the relationship between Be'ita, the onset of end times in terms of suffering consequent to Israel's trespasses, identified with Chevli Mashiach and Ikvata de Mashiach, and Achishena, the accelerated threshold to Geula, which manifested itself when the people of Israel were worthy, Teshuvah, which enabled the transition from Be'ita to Achishena, and God's Rachamim, which entered in either to enable or to replace Teshuvah for Geula to take place. Risikoff's messianic response to Kristallnacht would center on theurgic activities of Kohanim in terms of Teshuvah. Throughout, while he spoke in terms of the meta-historical process of Be'ita, Achishena, Teshuvah, and Rachamim towards Geula, his thinking was anchored in the belief that Geula was imminent from above, thereby placing his considerations at the interstice between the below and above awakenings. Retrospectives, prior deliberations. In his Divrei Menachem of 1911, addressing the 1906 slaughter and synagogue destruction in Morocco, citing Sanhedrin 98a, that if the people were worthy, the Shekhinah's presence and redemption would be miraculously hastened, Achishena. If they were not and failed to do teshuvah, they would undergo the troubles of Ikvah de Mashiach, the Be'ita. Risikoff offered that the sufferings in Morocco indicated that the people had been unworthy. The agonies would increase to the point of Yeseh velo achmine, let the Messiah come, but after my death so that I don't see them. But if the people grasped that the sufferings were those of Ikvah de Mashiach and performed teshuvah, they would be worthy of Geula. He concluded that if, God forbid, death is decreed, it will be by God and not by cruel wild killers. Let us awaken and cry out about the thousands of victims and desecrations of Torah. Thus, according to Risikoff, Geula was imminent in Morocco, and Be'ita had been underway. but the agonies could have been stopped through teshuvah, whereby the process would be directly under God and presumably hastened. Achishena. In Risikoff's response to the Av Tarpat pogroms in Jerusalem, Hebron, and Safed in Sha'arei Ratzon of 1931, which included an allegation that while European Jews victimized by pogroms did not have the courage to stand up to the murderers and abandon themselves as sheep to slaughter, those victimized in Tarzat did stand up and ready to fight and die, and succeeded in killing some of the enemy. He compared their souls to the soul of Isaac at the Akedah, and added that while in ancient times Ishmael had ascended to heaven to intervene on behalf of the 10 martyrs, there were no tzaddikim to do so on behalf of the yeshiva students. While the souls of the courageous yeshiva personnel were comparable to the souls of Isaac, their agonies were punishments by God, meaning that they were for the good of Israel. The suffering was predicated upon redemption and implied compassion. Quote, "Be assured that God will call an end to the troubles and will send the Goel Tzedek." The punitive, suffering, divine compassion, Geula dynamic also appeared in Risikoff's 1937 eulogy for Rav Kook, whom he met during his 1924 visit to New York, and about whom he actually dreamed. Rav Kook died, when he did, Risikoff wrote, out of God's compassion. Kook was of delicate temperament, sensitive and of good heart, and would not have had the strength to endure the deep sorrow over the terrible decrees and anti-Semitism belonging to the Chevli Mashiach and Ikvad de Mashiach about to come. That is, Be'ita was imminent, and in anticipation, had God extended his rachamim so that Yesei velo achmine, rachamim preceded the Be'ita at the threshold of Geula. 2 years later, in 1938 and 39, Risikoff would find himself amid the Ikvad de Mashiach. Kristallnacht brought him face to face with the Be'ita, Teshuvah, Rachamim, Achashena, Geula dynamic, and he endeavored to interpret the events in real time. Let me just get on the board. Risikoff calculated that the Messiah would arrive during the summer of 1939, during the month of Menahem Av. The creation of the world was entering the last 300 years of the 6,000-year existence. 2,000 years of void, 2,000 of Torah, 2,000 of Mashiach, Avodah Zarah 9a. The number 300, indicated by the term Peruta, until the last Peruta has gone from the purse in Sanhedrin 97a. The 300 also referred to the Nitzitzot being liberated from their klipot. The number derived from the 288 Nitzitzot identified by Chaim Vital in Mavor Sha'arim, plus 2 of the letters of Yud He Vav He. The 300 years culminated in 9 months of birth pains, citing Sanhedrin 98, about the arrival of Mashiach ben David, amounting to the 276 days from Kislev through Tammuz, the period of Be'ita. Achishena would begin with Menahem Av. Tarzach, whose letters included Retzach, murder, would yield to Tarzat, whose letters indicated Tirachem, Rachamim, Tzidkat, Techat, Tuvecha. The period of Be'ita, he said, was filled with Hitler's onslaught, beginning with chasing Jews out of Germany to be left naked, hungry, and suicidal following Kristallnacht. As Hitler was Tumah, he had to destroy purity, even if it killed him. Like Amalek, he was evil for the sake of being evil, injuring Israel even if it meant injuring himself, removing the eye of Israel even if it meant losing both of his own eyes. Like Haman, who had Mordecai bow down before him, Risikoff wrote, Hitler with his swastika was to be idolized. And while Ahasuerus hated the Jewish religion and allowed for conversion, like Haman, Hitler hated the Jewish race. And Hitler sought to convert the world to believe in the faith of the swastika, that of crime and murder and absolute hatred for the people of Israel. The evil was such that Risikoff could not write Hitler's name. He referred to Hitler as H and to the Nazis as Sitzan, swastikas as Akitsaves, and Mussolini as Anilesm, if you noted, reversing the letters so to obliterate them. Be'ita was also marked by England's betrayal, having promised to help Jews in Palestine and then turning to the Arabs while remaining oblivious to Israel's plight. Referring to the March 1938 Nazi absorption of Austria and the 30 September Munich Agreement between Nazi Germany, the United Kingdom, the French Republic, and Fascist Italy, he pointed to the betrayal of various governments towards Austria and Czechoslovakia. Had they offered assurance of defending, having offered assurance of defending them, Austria and Czechoslovakia could have survived had they not trusted those two nations. But Achishena was imminent. Risikoff cited a notice in the 22 February 1939 Der Morgen Journal. Mapule von Nazism wird geschehen kommenden Av, Leut Balshems Kitavyad. According to a report in the Jewish press in Warsaw, a new manuscript by the Besht had been discovered, disclosing in advance, vorausgesagt, the rise, Aufstieg, of Nazism and also its collapse, Mapula. Risikoff also cited a local daily paper, meaning New York, with an announcement on the first page by a so-called Baal Mekubal Mifusam in Sarajevo that the Mashiach ben David was to come on 26 January 1939 when the Ketz HaMegulah would take place. Although I could not verify this in any New York newspaper, the Lemberger Neue Morgen did carry a report on 26 January 1939 that the Mekubal Moshe Dreyer of Sarajevo, then over 100 years old, had predicted the end of Jewish troubles and the onset of Geula. The day after he died, the much-hated enemy of the Jews, Yugoslavian minister Roman Catholic priest Anton Koroshitz, was overthrown. 12,000 Sarajevo Jews, along with Jews from other parts of the country, abandoned their businesses and went out to the streets, singing and dancing ecstatically and sounding the shofar in a massive explosion of messianic expectation. A collective response, the medical doctor reporter wrote, to unbridled persecution and capricious cruelties of despotic Nazism. Now positioned real-time at the juncture between Be'ita and Achishena, Risikoff brought forward his earlier theme of suffering as being brought by God to evoke teshuvah from sin. Hitler was Haman, Hey, Mem, Nun stood for Hashem, Moshel, Tzitzan, and Chazal had Hitler persecuting Jews to bring teshuvah. The evil Hitler was sent from heaven, he wrote, with his swastika, whose letter Aleph pointed to the fact that Hitler was sent by God to punish those who do not keep his Torah. By returning to Torah, the Jewish world would be saved from Tzitzan. Risikoff amplified the Be'ita Teshuvah Achishena process to an apocalyptic level. In his summer 1940 treatise, HaKohanim VeHaLevi'im, he identified the era as that of Chevlei Mashiach. The world was divided between Rome and Jerusalem, between Tuma and sanctity, Satan, Sitra, Achra, Klipa, and sacred ministering angels and compassion, between truth, righteousness, and lie, wickedness, and between Gehinnom and Gan Eden. There were two cosmic powers in the universe: death, destruction, violence, and life, blessing, good fortune. Materialistic bestiality and cruelty and heavenly spirituality. One or the other would be destroyed. Hitler was out to destroy all Jews, while Jews were to take path of sanctity to the universe. Survival required teshuvah. At this apocalyptic moment, teshuvah was a matter for Kohanim, for they transcended, touched heaven. Risikoff wrote, Likutei Diniim, how heaven and earth needed each other, as did their messengers. The messengers above were created to serve Jerusalem, the temple above, and the kingdom of heaven. The messengers of the earth, like those of heaven, were to serve Jerusalem and the temple below. The Malachim above were to serve God with ceaseless love and Mesiras Nefesh. The Kohanim below were to yearn to ascend the above, to comprehend the will of God with intense love and ceaseless Mesiras Nefesh. Risikoff rooted the transcending teshuvah of the Kohanim in Chazal's Ta'anit 29. It described how, when the temple was set aflame, the elder Kohanim continued to worship. When one burned to death, another replaced him until all were immolated. At that point, younger Kohanim ascended to the roof. They declared their unworthiness to God and cast the temple's keys to heaven. A hand reached out, received the keys, and the young priest leaped out of the flames below. The keys would be returned to the priests for the temples to be reopened, restored upon redemption. Risikoff declared in summer 1940 that the Kohanim had by now rested enough. They had to awaken and gather together in a synagogue on a weekday for a day of teshuvah. Every Kohen 13 years and older should participate, signing a registry with documentation of Kohen status going back 3 generations. They were to fast as on Yom Kippur, don kittel, talit, and tefillin, sound the shofar, and perform birkat Kohanim. They should recite slichot with Musan Teshuvah content and pray about Israel's trouble, rebuilding the temple, restoring the kingdom of David, and the coming of the Messiah. Risikoff was convinced that if the Kohanim performed Teshuvah in this way, the sublime Holy Spirit would spread over them, they would awaken God's rachamim, and he would ease judgment and exalt the people towards the glory of Israel and Geula. But they had to act and convene immediately. With Ba'u Mayim Ad Nafesh, there was little time left. Thus, the Be'ita Achishena dialectic had intensified and risen to an apocalyptic level for Risikoff in real time. The sins of Israel had evoked God's punishment through Nazism. Only Teshuvah, which bridged the meta-historical transition from Kislev Tammuz to Menachem Av, with the apocalyptic encounter between the Sitra Achra and sanctity, could effectuate the Geula. And that called for the Kohanim, positioned between the Jerusalem below and Jerusalem above, who could ascend to retrieve the key of the temple from heaven and open it for redemption. The aftermath. The convocation did not take place. 8 years later, in Likutei Dinim, Risikoff mentioned briefly, Ein kan makom laha'arich, saying that the Kohanim had failed him, in effect cutting themselves off from the priesthood, citing al takrichu et shevet mishpachot hakehati. But Risikoff had earlier planted the seed to draw from when he came to the absence of Geula. He cited Divrei Yitzhak of the Av Beit Din of Shavel, which related how Geula had been expected in 1840. Jews awaited daily for Geula if they were worthy Achishena. If not, then Be'ita. But they were not to despair if it did not come. They were to wait, even if Elijah were to be delayed, continuing to anticipate his arrival every day. Nor should they believe when Elijah did not arrive in 1840 that it was because of their sins. To the contrary, to proclaim the calendrical arrival was itself sinful and could cause the delay. Reflecting on the messianic upheaval in Sarajevo, Risikoff observed that the quest for the messianic arrival was of itself a sign that God's promise would be realized, evoking Habakkuk, Sheyavo im Yitzhak Hashem be'ein safek b'meira b'yameinu amen, rak tzarik likavot u'liyachel u'levakesh mi'Hashem. Risikoff extended the psychological process into 1945. Speaking of the slaughter of 6 million Jews by evil Germany and Hitler, Risikoff understood the anxiety about losing hope, what with Britain also closing the doors of Palestine and leaving Jews in Israel to die. He encouraged Jews not to despair of the troubles. This was the time of Be'ita, and if Israel would do teshuvah rightly, Achishena would follow, and then Geula. As to the priestly convocation, Risikoff reported that he had received a letter from Av Beit Din of Kishinev, Yehuda Leib Tzirilson, sometime in between autumn 1940 and his death, and he was murdered in 6 July 1941, Tzirilson, referring to the treatise HaKohanim VeHaLevinim and calling for the Levite convocation. Tzirilson told Risikoff, and I quote, "Lekayem et hanichtav bo va'al yedei zeh nikarev geulat Yisrael b'mheira b'yomenu. Amen." Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say, and I apologize for not having said this before, that Professor Greenberg has been serving over the last decades as visiting professor in the Department of Jewish Thought and Philosophy at Bar-Ilan and the Hebrew University. And his research is in the field of religion and the Holocaust, as we heard today. And his volume on Orthodox real-time reflective responses to the catastrophe will be published this year by Yad Vashem. So please, if you have questions, please.
So first, it's a pleasure to see you and hear you once again. Could you say a little, this theurgic role of Kohanim? This sounds kind of new and a little odd. Like, what's it about? How does he get there? Does he mean like any old, like the garden variety Kohanim down the block? What are the Kohanim to him? What? I'm curious.
Well, this is clearly another whole lecture, but a lot of his work had to do with the role of the Kohanim. He himself was one. He referred to Rabbi Cook. But I did look as much as I could to see what was most relevant. And what turns out to be most relevant, as I saw, was this passage which he backed up. He was a fine rabbinic scholar, by the fact that these Kohanim did have a position which was unique. You know, having served in the temple and, you know, having the major role in atonement, he said, look, we have Malachim above, and they serve God and base a big Mikdash in Jerusalem. And then we have these Kohanim below, and they do the same, but what they're doing the same in the base Mikdash in Jerusalem below is actually a reflection and identifies with and evokes a response from the Kohanim above. And he has all the sources about that. So they did have this transcending role. And as such, what they could do, you see, going back to what's in Ta'anit, was that given the catastrophe, it was Be'ita, there has to be Achishena, and what they could do through their teshuvah, and only their teshuvah, was to go back, so to speak, to the roof of the base of Mikdash and retrieve the key from heaven, because they had this position between time and eternity, and also between what was happening below and above, because of course above it's happening in its own way. But this man wrote 20 books, and the one on this Likutei Dinim, Kohanim, that goes into every possible reason the Kohanim were superior. But that I got to that passage which pointed to the fact that they had this. But he did say, we were talking about this over lunch, he says that they're together in a synagogue, all the people in Brooklyn. I wonder, by the way, what the Rayatz would have thought, because I think he was already arrived in Brooklyn at the same time. And they were to do this, everyone over 13, but the daughters of the Kohanim were also somehow to participate in this service. But the key is that the Kohanim, he did establish, had this, what can I say, position between time and eternity, and therefore could retrieve the key from heaven, which was given by the younger priests before they descended into the flames of the temple. Yeah.
Please.
Do you see a relationship or a linkage between Rabbi Risikoff and the Prof Chaim speaking about learning Kodshim and each other?
Well, the Chofetz Chaim was quoted quite a bit. In fact, I think I was actually going to include it because after World War I, he says, "You think that was something? In 10 years, we're going to have the real stuff." But I didn't find, but 20, 30 large volumes. It could be there that he did it. I'll tell you who I was thinking of when all this happened. I was thinking about Charlap, because Charlap was already Charlap responded to Kristallnacht. He did it in some letters to his son, who was in Yeshiva University, and Charlap was already developing the apocalyptic Sitra Achra Kedusha conflict, but Charlap was speaking of in terms of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, and this was already taking place, on a higher level, on a metaphysical, cosmic level, whereby he was doing it really through the Levites. So, he was thinking mystically. Notice, by the way, a lot of this gematria and letters were in there. But I would. The Chofetz Chaim might be in there. It might be in there. It's worth looking into. Thank you very much.